What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel, where in today's video I want to talk about lightsaber wounds in regards to how they've been handled as of late, what the consequences of various characters surviving seemingly fatal wounds may be from a story quality perspective, and whether or not these events make sense. As you guys know, we most recently watched Sabine Wren be impaled by a lightsaber only to wake up shortly after and be pretty much ready to go after what was maybe a couple of days. And this is not the only instance of a character surviving being stabbed by a lightsaber, which is now sort of a recurring event that continues to raise a stir in the Star Wars fandom every time it happens. So in order to evaluate whether these instances actually make sense or not, let's start from the beginning with the big elephant in the room, the death of Qui Gon Jinn. In The Phantom Menace, Qui Gon is stabbed in the stomach by Darth Maul, whose lightsaber cut directly through Qui Gon's spine and cooked his lungs. The Jedi Master then used the Force to hang on for a few minutes, but ultimately his wounds would prove fatal. And this makes sense. A severed spinal cord is just about as serious as it gets in terms of injuries, and burning lungs is up there as well. Obi-Wan had to take care of Darth Maul while Qui-Gon fought for his life. There was no immediate medical attention available to give Qui-Gon a fighting chance, and so when all was said and done, it was too late. Maybe he would have had a chance if there was help right away, but there wasn't. And that is much different than what happened to Sabine. She is stabbed over on the side of her stomach, presumably through the liver or the kidneys, which yes, is still bad, but nowhere near as severe as the spine or the lungs. And Sabine then received almost immediate attention as Ahsoka arrived and got her the medical treatment she needed. So in my opinion, Sabine makes sense, although I will admit that when I was watching the episode, the first thing I said was, I'm about sick of people getting stabbed and surviving like it's nothing. I do think this sort of thing is getting repetitive and sort of ridiculous, but that's not because of what happened to Sabine specifically, it's because it keeps happening. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. Again, this one makes sense within the context of the story. We knew Sabine wasn't going to die, and they explained how and why she survived well enough for me. But a time when they didn't do that was back in the Kenobi series with Riva. Riva was stabbed by Darth Vader, left for dead in the middle of nowhere with no one to help her, and then she got up, presumably feeding on her lust for revenge, traveled to Tatooine, and suffered very few apparent consequences considering the nature of her injury. That to me was very far-fetched, and one of my personal criticisms of the Kenobi series that I have a hard time reasoning with. I felt that was silly, and I've felt that way from the time it happened. The same thing also happened to the Grand Inquisitor when Riva stabbed him, but again, we knew he was going to live, and we knew his species had two stomachs, so his fate was never in question. But one time is enough in one show. In my opinion, Riva either shouldn't have been stabbed, something else should have happened to her, or she should have died. That has nothing to do with how I feel about the character. I actually think she served the story decently well, but you don't just wrap yourself up and then walk away from that kind of thing, no matter how angry you are. Now, one thing that I think is important to point out here is that Disney is not the one who invented this concept of Force users surviving fatal wounds. Darth Maul survived being cut in half and falling to his death. He is by far and away, objectively, the most ridiculous example of this, and it's not even close. Now, it's also true that he suffered serious injuries and setbacks. I mean, the dude literally had no legs and was mentally insane when we found him, and it is explained that he survived by channeling the dark side in a way that someone like Riva could never dream of in my estimation, feeding on his singular hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maul surviving is definitely crazy, and if he's the bar, then I guess it's not crazy to see anybody survive pretty much anything in Star Wars, but I like that they brought him back. He became a far more interesting and complex character in the Clone Wars and Rebels than he was before, and he was really the first one to do something like this, which is important. And then finally, the last example I'll touch on, I have also seen people bring up Ben Solo surviving being stabbed by Rey as another example, and this one to me is completely different than any of the others and doesn't really fit into this category at all. I think the bigger issue some people have is that Rey was able to use Force Heal while Obi-Wan couldn't do such a thing with Qui-Gon, but that's a different discussion altogether, and I am totally okay with Rey and Ben Solo being able to do things that the Jedi before them couldn't. It's just kind of a given that the more stories they tell, the more abilities we're going to run into, and Rey and Ben are powerful characters with an even stronger bond which gives them unique abilities to match. Now, why Grogu could also use Force Heal is a different matter, and that actually raises more eyebrows than Rey doing it to me, but that again is a different discussion for another time. Kylo Ren was stabbed by Rey, once again not down the middle but more toward his side, and then he was healed almost immediately by Rey. So of course he was going to live. His survival was never really in question here, and his recovery is explained far better than any of these other characters we're covering. Personally, I think Rey stabbing Ben and then healing him was a really awesome thing to see in The Rise of Skywalker actually, and then obviously it was a pivotal moment for Ben Solo going forward. Again, I don't really even think this injury belongs in the discussion, but this is a parallel in the fact that he was stabbed and survived, so I figured we'd cover him too. But that pretty much covers my thoughts on this topic. The only characters I really think should have died are Riva and Maul, and then Qui Gon obviously. Maul's injury was different than all of the others, albeit significantly worse, but it was different, and he is a very different character with strong and very dark motivations and power, and he was kind of the OG of surviving the impossible, which makes a difference to me. But then, even on that train of thought, it's important to keep in mind that this is Star Wars, and sometimes the impossible becomes possible. Sometimes people use the Force in ways that we haven't seen before. Sometimes people survive things that they wouldn't be able to survive here on Earth. This isn't Earth, this is Star Wars, and so it's okay. The larger issue that I think exists now is just that we keep seeing characters get stabbed and survive, from Riva to the Grand Inquisitor to Sabine. It is what it is now. What's done is done, and I don't think this is some huge thing that we need to dwell on forever and make a big deal over, but I will say that it's not something I personally enjoy, and I hope they don't keep on repeating it. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this in the comments. I am going to wrap this video up here, so thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to drop a like on this video before you go, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and remember, the Force will be with you always.